Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a case that has really well mystified and divided opinion for decades. The Enfield Poltergeist. For many of you, I bet the name alone just conjures images of, furniture moving on its own, chilling voices, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
We're talking about the alleged haunting that gripped the Hodgson family. This was at 284 Green Street in London's Brinsdown, Enfield, between 1977 and 1979.
Right.
And it primarily impacted the sisters, Janet, who was 11, and Margaret, aged 13.
Yeah, and our mission in this deep dive really is to explore not just those sensational claims, which are pretty wild, but also the investigations that followed. And these came from both paranormal researchers and, the staunchest skeptics.
Right.
Ultimately, this story, it doesn't really matter what its true nature was. It serves as this powerful case study, in belief, skepticism, and how the media can really influence these extraordinary claims.
So, okay, let's set the stage then. This extraordinary story. Where did things begin? Back in August 1977, what were those first kind of incidents?
Well, it started seemingly quite small. Peggy Hodgson, the single mother, she initially called the Metropolitan Police.
Okay.
Described furniture moving, her daughters hearing knocking sounds on the walls. But what gives it a bit more weight straight away is that a police constable did report witnessing a chair, wobble and slide on its own.
Wow, okay. A police officer saw that.
Yep. Though they couldn't determine the cause, apparently.
And from that initial sort of oddity, how quickly did things ramp up? Because the stories became quite dramatic, didn't they? Drew in a lot of people.
Oh, dramatically is the word. Yeah, over an 18-month period, the activity just snowballed.
Right.
It involved more than 30 people, neighbors, paranormal investigators, journalists.
30 people, wow.
Yeah, and the claims grew significantly. We're talking disembodied voices, loud noises, objects being thrown across rooms.
Like what kind of objects?
Oh, everything from toys to, chairs being overturned, and even the children supposedly levitating several feet off the ground.
Levitation.
Seriously.
That was the claim. And many people heard and actually recorded distinct knocking noises and this particularly gruff voice.
Yeah, I remember the press coverage back then. It felt relentless. The Daily Mirror especially, they seemed to be all over it.
They were.
Until the reports just sort of stopped in '79. So with these initial reports grabbing so much attention, it wasn't long before, the dedicated paranormal investigators got involved.
Right.
Tell us about the key figures from the Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, people like Maurice Grosse and Guilain Playfair. What did they see?
Yeah, Maurice Grosse and Guilain Playfair were definitely central figures. They spent a lot of time at the house.
Right.
And they reported things like curious whistling and barking noises, apparently coming from Janet's general direction.
Strange. Playfair, especially, became convinced that an entity, as he put it, was responsible for all this. He detailed it in his book from 1980, This House is Haunted.
This house is haunted, right. Now, what's interesting there is, if he was so convinced, why did he also seem to kind of doubt the children sometimes? That seems like a bit of a contradiction for an investigator.
It is a paradox, definitely. And it's crucial. Playfair openly admitted wondering if the kids were, playing tricks or maybe exaggerating some things.
Okay.
So despite his overall belief that something genuine was happening, he wasn't totally blind to the inconsistencies.
Right.
Actually, Grosse and Playfair were even seen kind of compelling the girls to retract confessions of trickery.
Really?
Yeah.
They made them take back confessions.
Apparently so. And other researchers sometimes, mock them for being easily duped.
Yeah.
It highlights that sort of internal conflict you mentioned.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have the famous American demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren. They showed up, too.
They did make an appearance, yeah. The Warrens visited and were pretty quick to say they were convinced it was supernatural.
Okay.
However, researcher Brian Dunning observed that their visit was actually quite brief.
Oh.
And according to Dunning, it seemed maybe more focused on discussing how the case could be, leveraged for books and movie rights with Playfair, less about deep investigation.
Interesting angle. But, of course, with claims this big, you're going to get scrutiny.
Absolutely.
What's really compelling about Enfield is how quickly the skeptical perspectives started coming in, often with direct observations that seemed to counter the paranormal stuff. What did they find?
Well, quite a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Janet, the younger sister, she was specifically caught doing tricks on, multiple occasions.
What?
There was a video camera in another room, for instance. and it recorded her bending spoons.
Ah, the old spoon bending trick.
Exactly, and trying to bend an iron bar. And even Maurice Gross, who was, largely a believer, he himself saw Janet banging a broom handle on the ceiling and also hiding his tape recorder.
Huh. It's almost like she was testing the waters, seeing what she could get away with. And Playfair himself, didn't he notice something about one of Janet's voices, the Bill voice?
He did, yeah. That's a telling detail. Playfair observed that this distinct voice, Bill, had a habit of suddenly changing the topic.
Okay.
Which was a habit Janet also had. It's subtle, but it does raise a question about where that voice was really coming from.
Right. So it wasn't just outside skeptics. Even other people within the SPR, they reached different conclusions than Gross and Playfair.
Absolutely, yeah. Anita Gregory, another SPR investigator, she described several episodes of the girls' behavior as, suspicious. She speculated they had staged incidents, maybe especially when journalists were around looking for a juicy story.
Makes sense.
And John Beloff, who was a former SPR president, he went further. He suggested Janet might be practicing ventriloquism.
Ventriloquism.
Wow. Yeah. Both he and Gregory basically concluded the girls were playing tricks on the investigators.
And it wasn't just academics looking into it either, was it? I remember reading about a stage magician.
That's right, Milburn Christopher. He investigated briefly. His conclusion was pretty blunt, actually.
What did he say?
He said he failed to observe anything that could be called paranormal. He thought the whole poltergeist thing was nothing more than the antics of a little girl who wanted to cause trouble and who was very, very clever.
Ouch. And a ventriloquist, too. Ray Allen.
Yeah, Ray Allen visited and came to a similar conclusion that Janet's male voices were just vocal tricks. Nothing supernatural about them. Then you have the skeptic Joe Nickell from CSI Cop, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal.
Right.
He really went after it, criticizing the paranormal investigators for being, in his words, overly credulous.
Okay.
He pointed out Playfair's own observation that Janet's lips hardly seemed to be moving when one of those supposedly disembodied voices was heard.
That's a good point.
Nickell also looked really closely at the photographs. He argued that famous photo, the one supposedly showing Janet levitating.
Yeah.
He said it actually just shows her bouncing off the bed, like a trampoline effect. Melvin Harris called it gymnastics.
Gymnastics. Right, wasn't she quite sporty?
Exactly. Harris noted Janet was a school sports champion. It puts a different skin on that photo, doesn't it?
It really does. What about other weird things, like the tape recorder messing up? That was meant to be a spirit, right?
Yeah, Nickell had an explanation for that, too.
Oh.
He said what the paranormal investigators called supernatural interference was probably just a peculiar threading jam. Apparently, that was pretty common in those older reel-to-reel tape recorders.
Ah, okay. A technical glitch.
Seems likely.
Yeah.
And Deborah Hyde, another skeptic, she summed it up pretty well, saying there was no solid evidence for the poltergeist. She stressed that the strange occurrences didn't happen under controlled circumstances.
Right, which is always key. And those voices, the poltergeist voices, how did skeptics explain those away?
They suggested that the gruff voice wasn't a spirit, but produced using false vocal cords.
False vocal cords, what are those?
They're other parts of your throat, above your main vocal cords, that you can technically use to make sounds.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And crucially, they noted the voice had the phraseology and vocabulary of a child.
Yeah.
Strongly suggesting, a human source, a young human source.
Was there ever a moment, like on camera or recorded, where the girl seemed to slip up, give the game away?
There was one quite notable incident during a BBC Scotland interview.
Yeah.
Janet was seen apparently trying to get attention by waving her hand, and then she put her hand in front of her mouth right when one of those disembodied voices was heard.
Suspicious timing.
Very.
Yeah.
And even more telling maybe was when she was asked directly, how does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist?
What did she say?
Janet just replied, it's not haunted. And then Margaret, her sister, quickly jumped in a sort of hushed tone, saying, shut up.
Whoa. That's quite a moment. And didn't another magician, Bob Cowdy, listen to Gross's recordings?
Yes, he did. And his conclusion was similar to the others. He said, there was nothing in what I had heard that was beyond the capabilities of an imaginative teenager.
Right.
Professor Chris French, a psychology professor, he summed up the skeptical view really neatly with 5 points.
Okay, what were they?
1, the sisters admitted faking some stuff. 2, that levitation photo was likely just jumping. 3, the spirit seemed oddly interested in things like menstruation. 4, eyewitness accounts are just notoriously unreliable anyway. And 5, schoolgirl pranks can simply get out of hand. escalate beyond the original intention.
So, okay, we've got a pretty strong case building for hoaxing, trickery, misinterpretation. But is there any part of this whole Enfield story that still, I don't know, puzzles even the hardcore skeptics? Any loose ends?
That's a really good question. Because even when a cut seems largely debunked, sometimes there are these stubborn little details that don't quite fit.
Right.
And in Enfield, there's one piece of information that, well, it adds another layer of complexity. It doesn't matter if you lean paranormal or skeptical.
Ooh, what's that?
In that recent BBC series, Hauntings, from 2024, it came out that the unexplained Bill Wilkins voice, the gruff one they recorded a lot,
Yeah.
it was played on an LBC radio talk show.
Okay, and what happened?
A listener called in, identified the voice, said it was his own father, William Charles Wilkins.
Get out, really?
Yes. And here's the kicker. William Charles Wilkins had lived at 284 Green Street. He'd gone blind, suffered a hemorrhage, and died in a chair downstairs, June 20th, 1963.
Whoa, okay, that is weird. How does a detail that specific, that verifiable, fit into everything else, whether it's a hoax or something else?
Exactly. It raises this really important question. How does this specific, verifiable detail about the voice, its identity, its history in that house, even how he died, fit into either a purely paranormal explanation or a purely skeptical one based on hoaxing?
It doesn't easily fit either, does it?
Not neatly. Maybe the real insight here isn't about ghosts necessarily, but about how our sort of need for definitive answers can sometimes blind us to the nuances, the unresolved anomalies that just to persist. Even in cases that seem mostly explained, it forces you to consider the limits of our understanding, maybe.
That's a really fascinating point, and it probably explains why this case just keeps captivating people, doesn't it? Despite all the controversy, all the skepticism, the Enfield Poltergeist story is undeniably like a cornerstone in pop culture.
Yeah, absolutely. His presence is just huge, especially in British media. You had that 1978 BBC Radio 4 documentary, then the really controversial 1992 BBC mockumentary Ghost Watch, which terrified people.
I remember that.
Yeah. The 2007 Channel 4 documentary Interview with the Poltergeist, episodes of ITV's Strange But True, Extreme Ghost Stories, it just kept popping up.
And it's gone global now too, hasn't it?
Precisely. You have the 2015 Sky Living TV series, The Enfield Haunting, and then the big one, the 2016 horror film The Conjuring 2, which, really focused on Ed and Lorraine Warren's angst.
Yeah, that brought it to a whole new audience.
Absolutely. And even more recently, like 2018, BBC Radio 4 did the reunion, revisiting the case with witnesses. In 2023, there was a stage play, The Enfield Haunting, with Catherine Tate.
Catherine Tate.
Yeah. And also last year, Apple TV put out that miniseries, The Enfield Poltergeist.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Didn't they do something unusual with the recording?
They did. They filmed it in a recreated set of the house and used actors lip syncing to the original audio tape recordings, plus archival video, new interviews. Quite a unique approach.
Huh.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, I mean, the sheer volume and just the variety of all these adaptations, it just shows this enduring public fascination, doesn't it? Whether you think it's real or a hoax, the story itself just refuses to fade away.
So, when we bring it all back, what does this all mean? What happened at Enfield? It's still just profoundly polarizing, isn't it? A real touchstone when people argue about paranormal stuff versus rational explanations.
It really is. It's this narrative that's just so richly woven. You've got the extraordinary claims, you've got investigations that often clashed, and you've got clear evidence of human behavior too. Maybe innocent pranks, maybe sometimes deliberate trickery, all happening under this really intense public spotlight.
Yeah.
So considering all those perspectives, the claims, the debunking, but also that really unsettling detail about the Bill Wilkins voice.
Yeah.
What stands out to you, listening to all this, as the most compelling piece of information? How does a case like Enfield challenge your own understanding of, well, perception, belief, and maybe that surprisingly fine line between what's genuinely unexplained and what's just simply unexamined?